This is Electric Ladyland by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Let's talk records. After a stint in the army and struggling as a backup musician for R&B acts like Curtis Knight and the Esquires, James Marshall Hendrix trekked all the way to New York City in 1966 to try to make it in the burgeoning Greenwich Village hip scene. One night while playing with Curtis Knight and the Esquires at the Cheetah Club, Hendrix was spotted by a mesmerized Linda Keith, who was the then girlfriend of Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. Keith recommended him to Chas Chandler, who had recently left the Animals to become a manager and producer. Chas Chandler then brought Hendrix to London to get a band together. Noel Redding, who had auditioned to play guitar for the new Animals, was recruited as bass player. Drummer Mitch Mitchell, who had been in Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames, joined next. Chandler then suggested to Hendrix to change his name to Jimmy, spelled J-I-M-I. The Jimi Hendrix Experience then played all over across the pond, with Hendrix becoming the toast of the town and wowing audiences that sometimes included some of the biggest artists like Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Jeff Beck, Pete Townsend, Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, and others. The band then signed with Track Records in the UK. Are You Experienced is the first album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It was released first in the UK in 1967 and it reached number 2, and a few months later in the US and it reached number 5. Axis Bold as Love was the Jimi Hendrix Experience's second album, released late 67, and it reached number 2 in the UK and number 5 in the US. Recordings for the next album were scattered between July of 1967 to April of 1968. The first song recorded was Burning of the Midnight Lamp. The Sweet Inspirations were hired to do background singing for the song. The group included singer Cissy Houston, who is the mother of the later-to-be legendary singer Whitney Houston. The Sweet Inspirations later became Elvis Presley's background singers. Apparently there were always a lot of people hanging around at the studio during the recordings. At the same time, Hendrix had become a perfectionist, insisting on an abundant amount of takes. Perfectionism and the amount of people always around vexed Chandler, which caused them to part ways. All Along the Watchtower, a song originally by Bob Dylan, was released by the Jimi Hendrix Experience as a single on September 2nd, 1968 in the US and October 18, 1968 in the UK. Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones plays an instrument called Vibra Slap during the intro. Hendrix's version reached number 20 on the US pop singles chart. Electric Ladyland by the Jimi Hendrix Experience was a double album released October 16th, 1968 on Reprise Records in the US and Track Records in the UK. It's listed as being produced by Jimi Hendrix, which is something that did not sit well with Chas Chandler, who had a hand at production. For the album cover, Hendrix wanted a picture of the band by the Alice in Wonderland sculpture in Central Park taken by Linda Eastman, later Linda McCartney. Reprise Records in the US, however, released a blurry red picture of Hendrix playing live instead. In the UK, Track Records decided to go with a gatefold of a picture with 19 women wearing nothing shot by photographer David Montgomery. This cover would end up being banned in many places. Crosstown Traffic was the next single, released November 18th, 1968 in the US and April 4th, 1969 in the UK. Hendrix plays a kazoo that he made out of a comb and tissue paper. It reached number 52 in the US and number 37 in the UK. The song Voodoo Child was recorded live in the studio. Hendrix was out and about at a club when he bumped into Steve Winwood and spontaneously asked him to come to the studio and jam with them. Winwood had to learn the song that night, and it was recorded with him playing the Hammond organ. The next day, the Jimi Hendrix Experience came back to the studio where they were going to be recorded for a short documentary for ABC. They were supposed to pretend like they were recording, but Hendrix decided to improvise on the song that they had recorded the day before to create something new right there on the spot and recorded Voodoo Child Slight Return. Electric Ladyland reached number 1 on the US Billboard Top LPs chart, making it the band's most successful album. It was certified gold. Shortly after, Hendrix invested in the purchase of the Generation Club in New York. He wanted to reopen the spot, but when it was found that they had been racking up exorbitant bills at the recording studio, they decided to convert the place into a recording studio instead. Now Hendrix was free to record anytime he'd like at the new electric Ladyland studio. The studio is still open to this day, and many of the most legendary albums have been recorded there. This was the last album for the Jimi Hendrix Experience as a band. Hendrix went solo, performed his legendary concert at Woodstock, and released one solo live album, Band of Gypsies. He sadly passed away of an accidental overdose on September 18th, 1970. Rolling Stone magazine ranked the album number 54 on their 500 greatest albums of all time list in 2003, and then number 55 on the 2012 revisited list. It went up to number 53 on the latest 2020 updated edition.